Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Happy Friday. It's Tracy Cromwell here, your integrative nutrition health coach. And we're here for our special edition of Friday afternoon podcast. And if you are listening on the podcast, these are recorded live, so we don't get to do any editing. So anything can happen on a live broadcast. And so just wanted you to know that. But you may be familiar. I started these podcasts because I am an integrative nutrition health coach, and there's so many aspects of our lives that are so important beyond what we would see nutrition being. So we think of nutrition maybe as food, but it's as food is really important. So are all the other areas of our lives, such as our social life, our spirituality, our careers, our finances. How do we cook at home? Did I say relationships already? All of those things, education, that's all part of who we are, and that's all part of our life. So I'm wanting to bring people with all those different specialties from those different areas onto the show. And so today I'm really excited again to have my guest, Dr. Jen O'Ryan, on for part 2 of our 3-part series, which we're doing on inclusion, equity, and diversity. So Jen, I am so happy to have you here again with us today. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for our conversation.
Yeah, and Jen is, Dr. Jen is an expert in, you work on human behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
PhD in human behavior, and so you brought that then forward into helping people in the areas of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So today we're going to talk about, because last time we were talking about, where do we start? Go ahead and, we had that. What does IND even mean? Let's do a recap of what does IND really mean?
Yes. So conceptually, and the terms are kind of used interchangeably, but it's inclusion, diversity, equity. I also like to add an A for accessibility, and then an S for safety. So that works out 2 ideas. That's an easy way to remember those. And then also belonging. But really, it all comes down to the fundamental representation in organizations and in our lives of people who are different and don't necessarily look like us or think like us. And just adds so much variety to life.
Awesome. Thank you. And that to me is something that does interact with our whole lives. All of that, I think, doesn't matter who we are. That aspect, it affects us and our health and our mental health, all of that. So today we were going to talk about where are we going and how did we get here? And when I read that, I thought about just taking this to food just really quick, and my own health was when I was having challenges with my health, is because I didn't know why. I didn't know what I was doing that was causing the challenges with my health. And some of it I didn't want to know. I didn't want to take the time to know. But once I realized how I got where I got, how did I get to become pre-diabetic? And then I really understood that process. It was more than just about the food. It was about my thought processes, how I felt in my career, all of those other areas. How did I feel in society, as who I was? And then when I started to learn why I was there, I started to be able to make changes and figure out changes to where I could become healthy physically, emotionally, all of those things. And so when you said we were going to talk about this kind of the same topic, and in terms of, today being where are we going and how did we get here, makes complete sense. So we have to look at that big picture. So.
Yeah, it's always fascinated me because I've worked in organizational behavior and change management for decades, and it's always fascinated me how we tend to look at we've always had the leave your home life at the door, leave your problems at the door. When you're here to work, you're here to work. And now we're finally getting to that place where you can't leave it at the door. It's always with you. Like you're human. You're never just switching from employee to parent to volunteer in the community service, that kind of thing. And so it's really a matter of understanding how our work environment really influences our health and our well-being and the decisions we make around food. Like they're all intertwined. If I am working in a toxic environment then at work, then I am more likely to have these negative thoughts that lead to negative behaviors, that lead to maybe not going to the gym and just feeling ugh all the time, and cortisol levels go through the roof, and your chemicals are all out of balance. And I see
Yeah,
totally, it all blends together. And so even a few years ago, very few people were really talking about this concept of inclusion and diversity in organizations. And now it's front and center because of all the events that have culminated in where we are today. And now it's a question of, okay, how do we actually integrate that into a healthy organization? So not that we've just got a visibly diverse board of directors or visibly diverse leadership, but we've actually got that inclusive aspect, which is really just part of the healthy organization and getting rid of the toxic behaviors. And once we have that inclusive culture and we have visibility and people can show up as their authentic selves, that just it feeds into that immediate well-being, and it taps into the very human need of needing to be seen for who we are. And that's why I think you can't separate the two and expect to be healthy.
Right. And I think too, I think when I was really having a hard time with my food, it was because I was stifled as a person. I just didn't feel worthy as a person. I didn't feel good enough, or whatever was in my mind at that time. So I would look to food, and other areas outside of myself to make myself feel better. And it would integrate into everything I did, and that's where, if we can show up as our authentic selves, oh my word, that takes off. Oh, it's just like honoring yourself, You're finally able to honor yourself and show up as who you are, It's really, yeah.
Exactly. And it's the whole having access to resources and having access to information, because it's like the hierarchy of needs, right? If I'm so worried about protecting myself and being safe at work that I can't think about anything else. I can't think about creative problem solving, and I can't really put all my energy into that because I'm protecting myself and making sure that I'm safe.
Right. You mentioned in here the why behind the how of inclusion. Human tendency toward people who are like them, understand that there are other ways of being invisible or observable diversity. I hope I said that.
Oh, yeah, no, you totally did. Yeah. Because when we talk about diversity and diverse representation, we oftentimes think about what is observable, but we don't really think about all the different ways of being, people who are neurologically diverse, who interpret the world very differently. People who might be veterans or have PTSD or things like that, that they process information differently and they have different responses. And so it really is the broad spectrum of what do we mean when we talk about diverse perspectives. I mean, it's different people from different regions, urban, rural, they have very different lived experiences. People from different socioeconomic areas or levels that have very different experiences. And it's making sure that you have all of those not just available to be there, but that it's encouraged. So if I'm, if I have an MBA, then I'm talking to somebody who didn't graduate high school. It's not a lesser than, greater than. It's, I want to hear everybody's lived experience, and I want them to be able to contribute and feel like they're valued and seen.
Yeah.
And so we have to be really mindful, because as we talked about in the last week, our brains are so creative that we build stories around who people are at that specific moment in time. And I mean, there's been so many research studies around, people who are dressed a little bit better and are more physically attractive. People are more likely to help them in stranger situations than somebody who looks like they may be struggling with housing security. Much less likely to help them. And so we've got to stop making these assumptions about who people are based on that one moment, and really see the value and the dignity that every human deserves.
Yeah.
And
It's that concept of taking that next step to find out about that person. I remember when I was volunteering with the Master Builders Care Foundation, and there we were building. We would join or connect care providers with construction companies, and then build these amazing transitional housing projects. There were beautiful apartments and things, and so some of those fundraisers you would go to, and you can assume who you were sitting next to, right? And then you find out one of them at your table was a speaker who had been homeless, and and then the other person, and you would have no idea about their story, but you could make a judgment. I guess I wanted to say, we don't take the time. We don't take time to get to know people so much. And we don't, we can judge somebody by, I don't know if that's just a human nature thing, right? But getting past that to say, hey, the other aspect too is, if I think, just quickly touching on that aspect of the homeless problem we have, and that there's so many people that are they're actually still working, and they're trying to make ends meet, and they just, it's a very complicated scenario, and being very how that person's trying to show up as their authentic self. I think it's just, there's just so much involved. And I think I'm rambling here, but as human beings, we can really take the next step to look past what we assume of somebody.
Yeah. And I mean, we talk so much about, the term microaggressions gets thrown around a lot, and there's so much misconception around that. The microaggression seems like it's small. It's a small thing. And typically it is, but I also want people to think about it as micro being in the sense of between individuals, rather than this like systemic problem of institutionalized racism and discrimination and that type of thing. So if we're looking at microaggressions, that's the small things that I do, or the more subtle things that I do that are really, really damaging to other people, and will oftentimes go unnoticed because that person just tends to take it on because that's kind of been their experiences, just have to go along to get along. And I also want people to think about, though, that reaction that you have when you see somebody who is, has a tent underneath the freeway and is just trying to survive. What is your response and your reaction, and how do you change your behavior in that moment? Do you cross the street? Do you clutch yourself closer? Do you avoid? Do you say something to them? Do you automatically hand them $1? All of these things can actually be interpreted as microaggressions as well. It's reinforcing, oh, you live in a tent, so you are less than, or you are, have problems with drugs or alcohol or whatever. Just being outside and othered.
Yeah. And then I think too, for me too, I'm like, what is the right thing to do? You know what I mean? It's just, it's very complicated. And I think maybe the first thing just came to my mind was compassion, either in thought or something, but towards others in the workplace, and, our families, and not that it always is easy, but being conscious of that, I guess,
Yeah. And it sounds very aspirational. It sounds very woo, right? But it really is just being present in the moment and understanding, like, what is your presence in the situation? How is that impacting the other person? Is it increasing the risk and increasing the marginalization, or is it just acknowledging their humanity? Even if it's just, walking down the street and saying, hey, how's it going? Good morning, something like that.
Just a wave. Yeah. Just to see somebody. Actually see them and acknowledge them.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I used to travel quite a bit, I go through the airport, so you go through the hotel and you see like the housekeeping staff, and they're in the hallway doing the things, doing the job. And how many people just walk by them and only engage if they need something?
Yeah.
And I'm like, obviously, I'm not going to take the person's time and chat them up for 15 minutes because they're trying to get things done, right?
Yeah.
But just saying good morning or hello or something like that. It's just the little things of acknowledging the humanity of somebody else.
Yeah. So you also mentioned social change, increasingly diverse populations with decreasing acceptance, increase of violence and hostility, civil unrest. What happens now? So this is a pretty big topic. It's not an easy topic to talk about. And it creates a lot of emotion with a lot of people. So, what are your thoughts on that? The division we're having and lack of acceptance. I want to add too, the inability for us to just talk, even if we have different opinions, things like that.
Yeah. It's so complicated and so difficult because there are not just the facts and situations, but there's so many emotions behind that, and so much anger and so much, frustration. Is we're still having these conversations. The events of last year, so many events like that have been happening forever, but we're only seeing it now because it's being recorded by the computers we have in our pockets, and now it's irrefutable. And I think one of the most striking things is, we talk about having two justice systems in America, one for people of color and one for white people, and it can't be any more stark. I don't know if you've seen the images and the situation in Georgia where the elected official was knocking on the door of the governor's office while they were signing the policy into law, and just being marched away and charged with 2 felonies. And then you contrast that to the images of January 6th, where lawmakers were saying, I didn't feel threatened because these were my people. It's like, it's so stark. And we really need to start, calling that out and demanding action and demanding that, people be held accountable for that, because we've got this position and access that not everybody does.
Yeah. And I think when we talked about it last week too, was just, when someone's looking for equity, equal, that doesn't mean that they want more than somebody else. They just want the equal treatment that's been given to so many others for so many years, and so I'll be very honest here, because for me, it was just another level of experience of being, taking the rose-colored glasses off, as a woman, I just want equal pay, that's all I want.
Yeah.
But again, you add, I saw all women as all women, the same. And so again, the last couple of years was just another thing, taking these blinders off, realizing, no, I still have, even though I'm a woman, I have a benefit because of the color of my skin, and that needs to change, that. And I think too, it's, I've heard people say, well, both sides need to start changing their attitudes. And, I hear this argument, okay, fine, let's make change. And then we can raise our kids differently. If I'm a Black family, I don't have to raise my Black daughter differently than my neighbor, in another neighborhood, or another point at her school with a white daughter. I don't have to teach her different rules, or my son, because of different color of skin, different rules, so it's again, it's a very hot topic, but I think we have to just keep talking about it.
Yeah, and demanding change and demanding action, and honestly, it starts at the individual level. It really does, because just we do have that human tendency to self-select, and so we'll move into a neighborhood where people tend to look like us, and then we have book clubs where people tend to look like us, and really, it's just going out and seeing, like, how can I explore other areas? How can I expand my network? How can I what kind of work can I do to make that happen? Because it's I want to use the example of when I was talking about bias in organizations, and we don't even think about it. We see something, we fill in all the gaps around the story. And so the example I used to use was I would ask people, like, what's your first memory of understanding race? Or what was your first memory of gender? Your gender, somebody else's gender. And typically the people who would share that information would say, oh yeah, my first understanding of gender was it was bad to be a girl. Or it was less than to be a girl. You throw like a girl, you run like a girl, girls can't do math, all of those things. And when you look at it through that lens, where your understanding of somebody else's experience is that they are less than, then that immediately shapes, the assumptions that you make about them, and the ways that you may, if a woman says something in a meeting, it may be discounted. If her male counterpart says something in a meeting, oh, obviously they have done their homework. And so it's one of the things that I challenge people to do is when they see a message to replace that with another person. So if they see a message with a female, replace it with male, and just see if that message still rings true, or if it's basing stereotypes on.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I think one of my thoughts too is we can get defensive of how our belief structures were set up, and it's hard to release those, belief structures, what we were taught, and it's generational upon generation, and the brain doesn't like that, doesn't like to be challenged so much. But if we can look at, one of my thoughts is that maybe we put the lens on of learning, and how can we learn more? How can we, like you were saying, how can I, go to different neighborhoods and visit and, learn more about somebody else's, traditions and things like that, and embrace that. Maybe we feel insecure about it, but I guess great things come out of that. We can make changes, small changes.
Yeah, and that's how you get the muscle memory, right? That's how it's okay to be uncomfortable, because that's where the growth comes. It's like when you're trying to learn a new system or a new coding language or a new spoken language, it's difficult and frustrating, and your brain wants you to stop, and that's when you need to keep pushing through and learn. And there are so many phenomenal resources out there for people to just read about what it's like to experience the world as somebody who isn't like you.
Absolutely.
It's building that empathy, right? It's you don't have to become an expert in that. You just have to understand that it is very different to walk through the world as somebody else.
Yeah. You were, I like this. You're talking about use your access to challenge others, increase visibility, and amplify voices. What do you mean by that?
So it's kind of very similar to what we were just talking about. That excuse me, as a white woman, I have access to places that not everybody does, and so making sure that if I'm present and I look around and I can see which voices might not be at the table. Asking those questions, why are we 6 white people sitting in a conference room designing a product strategy for the world? Like, who else should be in this room? Lots of other people.
Should we have some global input?
Exactly. Maybe we should ask somebody is always a good question. And so it's asking those questions. And that's one of the reasons why, we need to show up for each other's fights, and we need to show up for each other's causes without making it about ourselves. And and it's difficult, because when I talk about the dominant culture, I don't mean like a better than culture. I mean more like predominant culture. Like if you work in the tech space, the dominant culture is white men who are of a certain age, and they don't notice when they are the only ones like them. And so it is having to notice that, and understanding that they're not necessarily going to just, we should have fewer white men in tech and hire more other people. And that's just not a conversation that's going to come to them by themselves. They need to be challenged, and typically they need to be challenged by their peers.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. So, and I think too, that there's the concept of, well, that's just the way it's always been. Why? I don't know what's. I mean, and honestly, I don't see anything wrong with that. You know what I mean? But that's part. The brain's going to say that. It's just like, but this is what it's always been.
Yeah. Well, and here's the kicker, though, and I do this a lot with the work that I do in support of LGBTQ plus individuals, and it's not just because it's new information to us doesn't mean it's new information. It means it's new information to us. So if we're looking at like gender and all the differences around that, it's not like this is something the millennials just invented to be different. Like, this has been around forever.
Yeah.
And I liken it to like when we used to think that blood was blood. We didn't realize that there were different blood types. If anything, blood was different based on somebody's race or ethnicity. And so now we know, because now we can look more closely at it, that yes, there are different blood types. You can't just put blood from one person into another person and think everything's going to be fine.
Mm.
And it's very similar with gender and other social constructs like that.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not the same as it was when I was coming up or when you were growing up. And that's okay, because we know more now and we can do better. I mean, the way it's always been is always like, okay, why was it always like that?
Yeah.
Because who made the rules? Like, who designed this to be like this? And who benefits from keeping it the same?
Yeah, who benefits from keeping it the same? And I'll throw in some food here. One of my areas of focus is educating people on the food industry, and does it make sense that the food industry is the way it is, and who's benefiting from pesticides being sprayed on our food? It's kind of the same thing. We follow, who benefits from the way our system is in terms of how we treat each other as human beings, So, yeah.
And I've always found it fascinating, because that's exactly it. If you look at how people ate in the 40s and 50s, it was very different. But then our food supply was also very different. It wasn't infused with hormones and antibiotics and all these other things. And we were different. We weren't sitting in front of computers for 8 to 10 hours a day. And so it's impossible to make those comparisons, because everything in the environment has changed.
Yeah. Whole different world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So different. Except we as humans still have strong opinions.
I know. And unfortunately, our very, very old brains have not caught up with all this new technology. No. It seems like it's coming from everywhere. And it's like, no. We're just humans. We're just trying to figure it out.
Yes. So. And I think, again, that's where we can challenge ourselves as human beings to figure it out, and it's uncomfortable, but let's do it. And for those of us that can really step up, and I'm calling myself out, step up, and it's way past time, and it's scary, and I'm uncomfortable at times because I don't want to mess up. But I'm just going to do my very best. And I think if we can all be like that, and, in however you show up, like you were saying, with empathy and compassion and willingness to learn. And if you flub up, okay, that's how we learn. We learn by.
That's exactly, yeah. And that's the thing, is like, it's okay. And it should actually be encouraged. We're humans, we're going to screw up. But there's no possible way we can know everything, right? Yeah. I know what my experience has been. I know what I've been exposed to. And that is just such a micro of everything else there's possibly to know. But what we should do is really embrace, when we're presented with new information, especially using, again, gender as an example, presented with new information, taking a step back, saying, oh yeah, actually that makes sense. And I was thinking about it in the wrong way. And so now I'm going to think about it this way. And I'm going to start to integrate that and internalize it. And that we should be embracing that. It's like, they're finding new things about physics that will undo many of the things we thought previously. And that's okay. We should lean into that.
And we can, again, be afraid to say we're wrong and stuff like that. And sometimes just a change of a word, maybe if it's, we don't want to put people in the shame world or whatever like that. But one thing I've been trying to use in regards to learning about food and things like that, but what is supportive,
Yes.
Maybe not so supportive. And so if a word makes you feel really, oh, I'm wrong or whatever, right? We can say, okay, how can we support or change our non-supportive habits, the way we look at others? I don't know, because part of my brain, I'm very like, well, I don't want to be wrong,
But nobody wants to be wrong, and nobody wants to think they're sexist or that they're racist or that they're any kind of ist. Nobody wants to be an ist, and so it's like, okay, well, how do you separate this label from maybe some of your thoughts and maybe some of your behaviors? And just kind of differentiate, because it's that needs to change, and that's very subtle. That's something that can be done.
Yeah. So you had, again, for overachievers, like you mentioned, for those overachievers, some next steps that we could do. So you were going to give us some ideas of what we can do.
Yeah. So for the overachievers, the homework for next week is to make a list of steps that you can take in the next 30 days. And that could be in your work, in your business, in your volunteer, in the community, in your family, in the grocery store. Make a list of steps that you personally can take in the next 30 days. And then identify the top two.
Mm-hmm.
And those two are your new focus areas for the next 30 days. And just be diligent and mindful and disciplined about doing those two things and learning from them and screwing up and coming back and really sitting down and evaluating what has changed for you as an individual and what do you feel like has changed? How did that experience feel for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you were mentioning earlier, it could be just acknowledging somebody. And normally you don't want to say hi because you feel awkward, but go ahead and like you said, hey, how's it going? Wave across the street.
Yeah. Or if
Acknowledge.
you hear something that's minimizing or microaggression or discriminatory, saying, "Oh, hey, could you explain what you mean by that? Because I don't understand," and move out of that bystander space, and make that a practice for 30 days.
That's great. Great idea. I like that. Calling, just say, hey. And sometimes too, like I mentioned to you about an experience I'd had on a call yesterday. It was very interesting to me, but learning how to have those discussions and then bringing to light, practicing how do you respond? Because sometimes it'll be like an hour or two later before I'm able to even think of what I could have said. You know what I mean?
Yes. And so in that case, a great practice might be when you do 2 hours later, have that epiphany of what you should have said, write it down, put it on a Post-it note and keep it handy because those situations are going to come back up again.
Yeah. Very good.
And writing it down.
Mm-hmm. And I love that, what would have changed for the better, for making these actions, and how could that person feel, now, and in response and of being seen, for who they are, so.
Yeah. Or even if it's something that you screwed up in an attempt to do the practice in the next 30 days, write that down too, because every opportunity for learning.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love it. Yep. Well, sort of, again, anytime we're trying to learn something new, it's a focused effort of, trying to like lifting weights, and it's a purposeful thought. And then eventually, as the brain get used to it, and the brain also, you can correct me here or not, but once it realizes that it's actually is a pretty wonderful experience to be stepping out, to be supportive and present, it's not going to fight you as much, know. Or what's that thing? It's like if and we can talk about this briefly too, but that fear of that deep grown, that came through our DNA, overreaction of fear.
Yeah.
Teaching it that this is not a tiger. This is something we can do to make an incredible world, and getting it to understand that.
Yeah. And getting your brain to realize that just because you're uncomfortable with it doesn't mean it's a fearful threat.
There we go. Well said.
So many times that this bigot and prejudice and things like that will pop up as fear, and you pull it back a little bit, and you're like, "That's a fear that I learned in the 5th grade, and it doesn't serve me anymore.
Yeah,
and it's actually holding me back. So I'm gonna give it a hug and send it on the way."
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I was trying to figure out a way to phrase it. Perfectly said. Yeah. Thank you. So wonderful. Well, we're already past 1, which always goes so fast. And I want to thank you again for taking all this time and doing this 3 episode, program with me. And I know that I'm learning a lot, and I'm sure all the listeners and viewers are as well. So again, everybody, Dr. Jen O'Ryan, she has a book available. Let's go back here. She has available on Amazon and Powell's, a field guide for excellent diversity experts. Highly recommend getting her book. And I think too, what we talked about earlier was, she works with people in the workplace, but that still incorporates to personal life. It's all integrated, right? So even if she's speaking just about employers or employees, we're all human beings, right? Mm-hmm. So highly recommend her book. And with that, anything else you'd like to say before we sign off today?
No, just never underestimate your ability to make a change as an individual.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. All right, everyone. We will see you next Friday with Dr. Jen one more time. And have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to y'all soon. Bye.
Thanks, Tracy.
Okay, bye.